Hey, welcome everyone, and it's great to see everyone in person. And welcome to the Finance Auditing Committee of Thursday, March 23rd, 2023. I want to call the meeting to order. Look at that. And with that, we'll do roll call.
All right, thank you. Director Cochran?
Here.
Director Giudice?
Here.
Grosboll?
Here.
Hernandez? Here. Verdoni? Vice Chair Parr? Here. Chair Rabbit?
Here.
President Terrio?
Here.
All right, full on your form for your finance. Also, we have Director Conroy. Thank you. Garbarino? Hill?
Here.
Maston?
Here.
Snyder?
Here.
And that's it. But you also are a committee of the whole.
Great.
I'm going to do this. Joe Waters. Can I do this one? I don't see Water here yet. So Joe Waters.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. We're going to move on then to item number 3 on our agenda, the ratification of previous actions by the Auditor Controller. And we have Joe Wire to give us a presentation on these items. This is pages 5 to 24. The PFM report starts on page 9. Wale is not here yet, but Joe is going to fill in.
Thank you. It's good to see you all. Yes, I am standing in place of PFM's representative Wale, but he will be back to you normally at the meetings. And just taking a look at your report, he provided it as usual. If you look at I'll start on page 10, just cover a couple of the highlights. First of all, which many of you are well aware, the interest rates have been gone back up, and they were increased even more 2 days ago, I think it was. So we'll see that. And those are the short-term rates. And I think is what is interesting, and I'm sure what Wally would be reporting to you, is we have a very significant inverted curve. In other words, usually if you give your money away to someone for a longer period of time, that's a risk for them because they're taking your money and giving you some rate. They're going to give you less. They're going to give you more because you're taking this risk. And now the fact that you get a higher return on 2-year than you will, or actually on 6 months than you will in 5 years. So it's a huge inverted curve that's happening right now in the marketplace. It's a sign essentially that says that in the future the interest rate should be lower. Everybody thinks so, but not now. So we'll be waiting for that. Then turning down to page 12, I think the importance of this page is that there's 2 measures here which show that the consumer, which is all of us, we think things are a little bit better than they were. And that's a good sign. It tends to mean that we will spend, and since we consumers drive 70% of the economy, that's a good thing. We spend, then the economy does better. And that could be, it's a positive sign for the economics. It's a negative sign to the Fed because then they think, if we spend more, that means we could drive up inflation even higher. And that's, if you turn to page 13, that's sort of what's happening. So inflation was dropping and has been dropping. It's not as high as it was, I think it was like 6 months ago, but it is ticked back up a couple. I don't think, as you can tell from the interest rates, people believe it will stay up there for a long period of time. It will fall, but for now, it's ticked back up a little bit. And that's something that we've all been living with. The portfolio itself, there's a couple of other pages that you're welcome to look at on housing and some other things. The portfolio itself is earning a little over 2%. If you incorporate in our short-term earnings, and short-term is higher, as I mentioned, the rates are higher in short-term. It's about 2.4%, and it's invested in compliance with with our investment policy. And if you have any questions on this report, I'd be happy to answer.
Thanks, Joe. We do. President Terrio.
Just a comment. I note with some amusement that you have 1% in Credit Suisse. Credit Suisse.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
we
some difficulties lately.
PFM has sent us a report. They've done their due diligence on this, and they've yes, Credit Suisse, as many of you may have read, has been in the news for not positive reasons, but there's no belief that these particular securities that we have for them is in jeopardy.
Maybe we'll soon have 1% in UBS. Is that right? I think they're coming to the rescue.
Yeah, that's right.
Any other questions of Joe on this report? I am not seeing any. Before we move on, is there anyone from the public who'd like to speak to this item?
We have no one in the room. And Justine, do you have anyone from the public wishing to speak on item number 3?
We have nobody wishing to speak on item 3. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We have no speakers.
Great. With that, this is an action item, correct?
Mhm.
So we do need a motion on 3A through 3D.
Okay,
Second.
We have a motion and a second. And with that, can we have a roll call?
got it. All right, we're voting on item number 3 with the first and second, starting with Director Conroy. Dorsey is absent and Guardio is absent. Garbarino?
Aye.
Judice?
Yes.
Grosboll?
Yes.
Hernandez?
Aye.
Maston?
Aye.
Moulton Peters is absent. Parr?
Aye.
Rabbit?
Aye.
Redoni?
Aye.
Safai is absent. Snyder?
Aye.
Stephanie is absent. Fear is absent. Second Vice President Hill?
Yes.
First Vice President Cochran?
Yes.
And President Terrio.
Yes.
And we have 13 ayes.
Great. Thank you all very much. Moving on, item number 4, the item that we just heard at the Building and Operating Committee, authorized budget adjustments and transfers in the fiscal year 22-23 Bridge Division Capital Budget, Project 1526, the Golden Gate Bridge Suicide Deterrent System Construction Project. If there's any questions, the chief engineer is here to answer those. Does anyone have any questions regarding what we just heard? Not hearing any. Perhaps we'll see if there's anyone from the public who'd like to speak on this item.
Justine, I have no one in the room. Justine, do you have anyone speaking on item 4A?
We have no one speaking on item 4A. Thank you.
Great, thank you. No speakers.
Move the item. Second.
So we have a motion and a second. With that, we'll have a roll call.
Got it. Thank you. First and a second, starting on item 4A, Director Conroy. Dorsey is absent and Guardio is absent. Garbarino.
Aye.
Judice.
Yes.
Rosebowl.
Yes.
Hernandez.
Aye.
Maston. Moulton Peters is absent. Parr.
Aye.
Rabbit.
Aye.
Redoni. Safai is absent. Snyder.
Aye.
Stephanie is absent. Fear is absent. Second Vice President Hill.
Yes.
First Vice President Cochran.
Yes.
And President Terrio.
Yes.
Thank you. You have 13 ayes again.
Great. Next up, item 5, authorize or approve actions relative to the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program. And we have Joe again to talk about the LC Top.
Acronym. Correct. We're here to talk about the LC Top program, the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program. This item is to request that the board approve a series of actions to allow the district to receive these funds. This is a program that regularly dispenses funds to the district and other transit operators. Those actions include you would approve the submission of the grant application itself. You would certify that the district will comply with all the conditions and restrictions, and that you would authorize the general manager to expedite any and all forms that we're going to have to fill out in order to apply and to receive these LC Top funds. There's approximately 2.6 million available to us, and the district at this present time has plans to put it toward the beginnings of replacing the 4 high-speed ferries that we presently have. The first one that's in line to be replaced is the oldest, and that's the Del Norte, and that will be replaced in the coming couple of years. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Any questions for Joe on this item? Not seeing any. Very quickly before we move on to an action, is there anyone from the public who'd like to speak on this item?
Justine, I have no one in the room. Do you have anyone on your public line who wants to speak on 5A?
We have nobody for 5A. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Great. And I'll bring it back and look for a motion to approve.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move the item.
Great.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. And can we have a roll call, please?
Thank you. Voting on item 5A with the first and second, Director Conroy will start. Dorsey is absent and Guardio is absent. Garbarino.
Aye.
Judice.
Yes.
Grosboll.
Yes.
Hernandez. Maston. Moulton Peters absent. Parr.
Aye.
Rabbit.
Aye.
Redoni. Safai is absent. Snyder.
Aye.
Stephanie is absent. Theer is absent. Second Vice President Hill.
Yes.
First Vice President, enthusiastically, yes. Okay. First Vice President Cochran
Yes.
and President Terrio.
Yes.
Thank you. 13 ayes.
Great. Thank you very much. Moving on. Item number 6, approve fiscal year 23-24 through 27-28, the 5-year fare program, amend the master ordinance, approve the Title 6 analysis. I remember the class where we had the Roman numerals. And adopt the notice of exemption. We have Ron Downing to make this presentation. Thank you.
Chair Rabbit, members of the committee, board members. The item before you is to approve this 5-year fair program for fiscal years 23-24 through 27-28, with all of these companion actions that go with it to amend the master ordinance, adopt the Title VI analysis, and file a notice of exemption under CEQA. The item begins on page 45 of your board packet and continues for 86 pages. It's a lot of information, and I'm going to distill that down for you. But before I get into the details, it took a village to get us to where we are today. This program before you this morning is actually on a fast track compared to the timeline that we used to have for getting July 1st fare increases in place because of an earlier deadline established by Cubic, the contractor for NDC, on the Clipper card program. They're busy with Clipper 2.0. And so they gave us a deadline of April 1st to get any fare changes into them for July 1st date that we're establishing here. A lot of people had a lot of hands on this effort getting this to you today. And I want to acknowledge them. In Joe Wyer's shop, Jennifer Minucci and 2 of her staff, Pooja Gangurde and Eric Reeves, did a lot of the financial analysis going into the projections that created the estimate of future revenues on this. Pooja and Eric are fairly new to the district, and were kind of saucer-eyed when we showed them 4 different fare options and fare tables and said, take it and run with it. They stepped up and got the job done. I also want to acknowledge Dana Failer, our Director of Marketing and Communications, and Megan Goodwin on her staff. We had 2 virtual public meetings to talk to the public about this proposal. They did a great job putting it all together. Dennis and I participated in it. Came off really well, even though we were kind of feeling our way in the dark. Well received by the public. We had about 24 people at each of the forums, and I'll get into the details on that. Barbara Vinson, as I spoke last month, she was deeply involved in the Title VI analysis. There's a whole appendix in your packet relating to the Title VI analysis. It is favorable to this proposed fare program. Josh Widman on my staff digested all of the comments, and that's in another appendix. And finally, David Davenport on my staff was my voice of reason. As we were sorting through 4 different fare scenarios with all of the details, all of these permutations, and what I called carve-outs at our last meeting, the exceptions, he was my sounding board to say, is this right? And finally, Roberta Regan, my administrative assistant, was instrumental in putting this all together, along with some last-minute troubleshooting by both Justine and Amaret as far as the appendix tables that you'll see at the back of the packet. So what's before you? We have a 5-year fare proposal. It is not intended to meet any of our fare box recovery targets. It's intended to be a starting point for the next 5 years to introduce a measured fare increase of 25 cents per year for both bus and ferry for the 5-year program. There are exceptions to that. We are offering some mitigations in terms of our equity riders in Sonoma County, reducing the fare from $5 to $3 to encourage ridership where we have capacity. We are adjusting fares across both Clipper and cash payers from the East Bay to correspond to the fares that we need to offer for the BART Early Bird Express contract that we have. We are holding Marin local fares at the $2 established by Marin Transit, again, for conformity and ease of customer understanding. And we're making some changes on the ferry side to, again, address equity issues in terms of how we price Clipper start fares, which is the 50% off. Instead of pricing that at 50% off the cash single-use fare, we're proposing to price that at 50% off the Clipper fare. So that would be a reduction for those riders and hopefully make the ferry more attractive for low-income riders to use. We are also adjusting one situation with the Angel Island service where because of the urgency in establishing that service, we were not able to fully recoup the Angel Island Park entrance fees. So the action before you remedies that situation so that that is not revenue to the district. It is a pass-through, so it's just a fee that we collect. So that will be making the district whole on that moving forward. So we are recommending option 2 for adoption. It's the 25 cents across the board. We had a good deal of public engagement, extensive public outreach, and many comments received. Not a huge number, but comments from the public open houses. There was some, I'll say, confusion among the public as to what does 3% mean? What does 4% mean? And, it was pretty much 25-cent increases until those percentages compounded in the later years. And so for ease of customer understanding, we said, let's go with 25 cents. It's easy to understand. Everybody knows what they'll be expecting, like the program. And in the end, it's a modest contribution to our overall financial deficit based on current day ridership patterns. Now, we expect that those will recover in the future as traffic begins to return to a degree of normalcy. So this is just setting the stage for the next 5 years in terms of what the policy would be, and hopefully the revenues will follow. So with that, I can answer any specific questions about any of the components, but that's just a broad overview of the 86-page item in your packet.
If I could, just one brief thing. I don't want to gloss over the change in means-based fares for ferry customers. Low-income riders on our ferry system currently get a 50% discount off the cash fare, and Ron said that, but he didn't put dollars to it. So today, a low-income rider pays $7 to ride the Sausalito ferry. Under this proposal, it would drop to $3.75 for that customer. So we think that's an important step to make as part of this, while we raise fares a little bit, basically, for almost everybody else. So I just wanted to put numbers on that, because $7 to $3.75, I believe, is significant, and will make the ferry a lot more accessible for folks that struggle in our community.
Director Grosbaugh.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate you doing that. I'm sure it's in here, but how much additional money will we raise this year with this 25-cent increase? What's the estimate for the first year of this? It doesn't have to be precise. I'm just sort of curious.
It's not a lot of money. Over the 5-year period, you can see numbers on page 50 of the staff report. The reality, though, is that's based on current ridership. And so there's 2 things we want to do. One is we want to increase fares a little bit every year. Otherwise, 5 years from now, we may be looking at a large increase. And a $1.25 increase would sound significant, but 25 cents a year does not. If ridership bounces back, the numbers in these tables will increase greatly. These are based on today's ridership levels with modest growth. And obviously, we're hoping to see much more than that going forward. But there is a number there over the 5 years. It doesn't look that large compared to our challenge, but it's an opportunity for us to have the customers that ride our bus and ferry system participate a little bit.
Was there a minority position among the staff that maybe we shouldn't increase this, given how low our ridership is?
No, the position was that we needed to start down a path of having some revenue increases, and this would again set the stage for what we expect in the future.
The reality is, to expand upon that, today in downtown San Francisco, as we speak, there are 150,000 fewer people than there were the same day before the pandemic. So we don't control that. Those that have to go in gladly ride our service. At times they demand our service. I'm looking at Supervisor Rodoni when I say that. And so we're adding service back incrementally when they want it. But we don't control people's desire to go back. We are excited that Monday of next week is the first preseason Giants game. And as the rain eventually, we hope, stops, we'll see what we saw last year. But, our ridership does not seem to be price sensitive. It's more they want their trip there when they want to take it. The 114 riders don't care if we raise it 50 cents a year. They just want that bus. And so our customers, for the most part, are not that price sensitive historically. And we do have things in here that we think address equity concerns that are very helpful. And so, some communities look at having free buses for school kids. My response to that is Mark Zuckerberg's kids should pay to ride the bus. It makes sense to have a means-based program to address those that truly need it, and to focus on those discount programs while perhaps having everyone else pay just a tiny bit more.
I noticed on 63 there, one of the comments was that it'll decrease ridership. Do we have and the district acknowledges there's a small decrease. Do we have an estimate of what that decrease might be?
Don't have an estimate of what that decrease might be because our ridership has actually been fairly stable coming out of the pandemic. So as Dennis said, the people that are riding right now, paying fares to go into San Francisco don't seem to be price sensitive. Anybody who would be more economically disadvantaged is covered by other parts of this program. And in some cases, their fares decrease, their fares are held the same. So we don't expect to lose ridership as a result of this small increment each year.
You know, I know we need the money very much so, even if it's only 500,000 or 600,000. But my understanding is in the 3 years of the pandemic, the only promotion we have done to try and get more ridership was one July 4th weekend where we offered discounts on the fare. Is that right?
Yeah, a free weekend. We've contemplated some other free days. Free days are easier than a discount just based on Clipper. And so it's something that we, have in our toolkit going forward. We're doing marketing with others for Angel Island and for the Giants and things like that. Recreational ridership seems more to provide more opportunities. You may recall during the pandemic, we took over Angel Island service, we took over Weekend Tiburon service, and some of those things can be fruitful. Last summer, we did see a return of many tourists, not all, but we're running 2 boats again in Sausalito. I might add that our cash fare, which is almost akin to a cable car fare in San Francisco for Muni, represents 35% of our ferry fares. And so visitors from out of town are not price sensitive, as evidenced by the fact that they're willing to pay $14 to take the boat back from Sausalito to San Francisco. So we think we structured something that was responsive to the needs of the community to give us a little bit more money because our costs go up a little bit every year. Our principal cost is people, our employees. Recognizing that we're not meeting our goals for how much we want to raise, but just so that we're not freezing it for several years and then all of a sudden looking at what sounds like a much bigger increase 5 years from now. So there is some, I think, dare I say, marketing strategy behind it.
Well, I acknowledge you've been persuasive these last couple of years on you don't have control over the downtown San Francisco, but it is frustrating that we haven't done much at all to promote ridership. And I don't know what we could do, but I don't know if the staff has had those discussions, but
we did some joint stuff with MTC as leadership. So MTC did a big ad buy that, talked about us. And there was a local component that was mostly on social media in the North Bay. So if you're in San Francisco, you wouldn't see on Facebook Golden Gate Transit. But there was a campaign done, I think it was about 2 years ago. And when they reopened, the grand reopening, June 15th, the governor announced there was a rather significant campaign that fall. So it's about a year and a half ago now. So there was a pretty significant campaign. It did not move the needle at all. What moved the needle is the Giants having a good season, to be blunt.
well, we can't count on that.
And
That was some of those trades.
And the return of tourists to San Francisco. When having international travel initially from Europe and then from Asia also to return was something that was noticeable for us, particularly on the ferry side. On the bus side, it's really tied to employers and their expectation of their employees. And certainly with downtown San Francisco being, unfortunately in hindsight, not a very diverse economy and being very tech-centric has introduced some challenges. And today, as we speak, there are over 20 Salesforce towers of available space for lease in downtown San Francisco. When you look at that tower and picture 20 of those are vacant right now, that's challenging for us. When the other regional operators, BART, Caltrain, AC Transit, SFMTA, and certainly for the city and county of San Francisco with their budget. And so we are meeting weekly. We are strategizing. Our marketing and PR people get together. We're doing various, ideas for regional campaigns. But we certainly can take a look at what we could do, focus in our geographic area, and we can come back to the appropriate board committee at a future meeting in the next couple of months.
Thank you.
Director Garbarino.
Hey, thank you, Dennis. Thank you, David. I just wanted to thank you. I know even in passing, people ask us as board members, when is the ferry service going to be back to what it once was? And they're back to where they once were, I guess, but they don't necessarily realize. So the statistics about what is going on in San Francisco in the financial district are really helpful. They're simple and easy to explain, and they draw the picture beautifully. So thank you so much.
Director Mattson.
So I'm really happy to support this option. From the beginning, I was supportive of a 25-cent fare increase, partly because of the ease of explaining to the general public whether they liked it or not. But I am curious, what do we have an estimate of the value of the carve-outs relative to the standard fare?
While Ron's looking up the number, I'll tell you they're nominal. He'll give you the numbers
Yeah, I
by
figured it
category.
would be,
We haven't
but I was
buried in there.
curious.
We don't carry a lot of local riders in Sonoma County, but at certain hours of the day, we're the only trip out there because of we operate basically 23 hours a day. So it does provide opportunities to make our service more accessible to those who don't have access to cars. But I think the number of riders is, like
25,000 a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a small number of riders. We're giving them a small discount, so the revenue impact is
And each day is smaller.
very small.
Great, thank you.
Anyone? Director Hill?
Yeah, I'm a little bit skeptical about the return to normal. I don't think it will personally for a number of different reasons. I think that, and also for San Francisco, if things are turning around, we will have congestion management, which will be, brought in to discourage the use of automobiles. I certainly support what we're doing right now. I think that's a very good idea. But I think we should be very much conscious that it may not be the same afterwards.
Anyone else?
Or just one thing.
Please.
San Francisco, by the way, the home of AI is in Hayes Valley. So it may not be downtown. It's not going to be down where it is now, but there is a growth in the area of around Market Street and Van Ness. That could be the beginning of kind of another growth spurt. Just an observation.
Great. Ron, first off, just thank you, and thank you to all your staff. I know there's a lot of work behind the scenes here, so thank you for that. Very much appreciate it. Just for my own comments, I will say, we're in this conundrum of, I remember that contract through MTC, the reopening of transit, was a significant investment. And as Dennis said, it didn't move the needle. And so I think there's a really cautious, how do we do? And is this issue bigger than just, doing the usual marketing and attraction kind of approach? So I will say that from that perspective, that Golden Gate Transit is no different than the other 26 transit agencies that are out there. People seemingly have returned much more to the regional and local than they have to the commute. That's the big issue that we're all trying to grapple with. And then I will say on the equity side of things, that also has been interesting because I think we've made the right movements in terms of the means base, but it has an impact on revenue at a time when you also have all the ridership going in the other direction. So it just makes the difficulty moving forward that much more challenging. But just want to say thank you, Ron, for your work. And with that, I'll look to the Secretary if there's anyone from the public who'd like to speak on this item.
We do not have anyone in the room that would like to speak. Justine, do you have anyone on your public line that would like to speak today?
We do. We have David Pilpel this morning.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, David. Please go ahead.
Excellent. David Pilpel, not far away from you physically, but still at home. So on item 6, no fare program is perfect, but this proposal advances several important goals and priorities. I hope you saw my letter from last month, which I won't repeat or summarize, but just emphasize the central issue of the Marin local fare. As long as that stays at $2, I believe the district is heavily constrained as to transit fare revenue. Many, perhaps most or half of the bus riders are local riders, and $2 is a relatively low fare for the local trips on Golden Gate Transit. In any event, other passengers then carry more of the burden in general, and particularly as relates to fare changes or fare increases. So I do support the staff recommendation today, and I know that fares and transit service are connected and will be back again in the future. Also good staff work all around, and I specifically appreciate the public engagement that occurred here. Thanks very much for listening.
All right. Justine, do you have any other speakers?
We have no other speakers. Thank you.
All right.
All right, thank you for that, and bring it back to the board. Look for if there's no more discussion, a motion to approve.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. If we get roll call, please.
Thank you. Voting on item number 6, the first and second, starting with Director Conroy. Aye. Dorsey is absent and Guardio is absent. Garbarino.
Aye.
Giudice.
Yes.
Grosboll.
Yes.
Hernandez. Maston.
Aye.
Moulton Peter is absent. Parr. Rabbit.
Aye.
Cardoni.
Aye.
Safai is absent. Snyder. Stephanie is absent. Thier is absent. Second Vice President Hill.
Yes.
First Vice President Cochran.
Yes.
And President Terrio.
Yes.
Thank you. You have 13 ayes.
Great, thank you very much. Before we move on to item number 7, I notice Wale Kuchapai is here, and even though we've already covered this, Wale, if you'd like to add any further embellishment on the PFM report, please do.
That's okay. You can start from the beginning. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see everybody in person for the first time. So I'll start with the PFM report on page 10 of the packet. So just to go over what happened in the month of February, we did see an uptick in yields. So if you look at the 3-month all the way down to the 5-year, you'll see that yields did have some fairly significant increases in the month of February, and that the inverted yield curve did continue to steepen in February. Now that's changed since then, but we'll go over that in the March report. We move over to page 11. ISM manufacturing data is an indicator that a lot of people use when it comes to looking at whether the economy is in a expansion territory or contracting, and we're pretty much on the cusp between contraction and expansion. There is some good data, such as employment is continuing to hold steady below 4%, but when we look at things like demand and some of the production and employment numbers, those are in contractionary territory. So something to watch, but for the most part, our outlook is still fairly not as positive as we were going back in 2020. Consumer price index or consumer sentiment did increase in February. We look at the University of Michigan survey and then also to the consumer sentiment index. Those did have a slight uptick in February. Now that might change now that we've had some of these bank failures that have happened over the last couple of months and some stress not only globally, but not only in the United States, but also globally. So that's something to keep in mind as we move into the final month of the quarter. We look at inflation. So the Fed's measurement of inflation, they use what we call core PCE, and when we look at the month-over-month numbers, we can see that that number continues to move in the wrong direction. So inflation still remains a lot more stickier than anticipated, which is part of the reason why Chairman Powell did reiterate yesterday that they do not have any rate cuts anticipated for 2023, and they went ahead and did raise rates by 25 basis points yesterday. Lastly, when we look at what was done in the portfolio for the month of February, I'll skip the housing data stuff for now. When we look at what was done in the portfolio, we did make some purchases in the portfolio, some corporate notes, treasuries, and then also some asset-backed securities. The yields in the market for new issues continues to remain very, very attractive. So our portfolio manager has been able to lock in some very attractive yields going to as far as 2028. With the exception of the U.S. Treasury note that was purchased, all of the yields were pretty much above 4%. So with that being said, as we continue to make those purchases of high quality liquid fixed income securities in the portfolio, the yield of the overall portfolio continues to climb up steadily. So I think now if you include Lafe and Camp or the Camp portfolios, we're somewhere near 2.4% for the overall portfolio. That is it for my report.
Great, thank you very much. I'll look to my colleagues if there's any questions. Not seeing any. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Appreciate, and it's good to see you in person as well. With that, we'll move up back to the agenda, back to item number 7, which is approve actions relative to the annual review of the Title 11 investment policy. of the rules of the board. Joe?
Thank you again. This is here to talk about this, as mentioned, the annual review of the investment policy and your delegation authority to the audit controller. So those are the two recommendations in your recommendation section. The first one is part of your rules of the board. You're required then to take this action every year to delegate the authority to me, and then for my position, and by that, we then have also a discretionary agreement for investment of that authority to PFN, who Wally just spoke to you now, to the firm that he represents. And they have been running our investment platform here since the 1990s, and they will continue to do so as long as we see fit to do so, that contract. So that's your first recommendation. The second recommendation is the review and investment policy. It's attached in the as an attachment. The important point here is just a reminder that years ago, this board took an action to equate its investment policy with the state investment policies of the state of California. So whenever they make a change to their policy, that is automatically made into our policy. And the only times we bring something directly back to you is if for some reason it has our own specific, we've made a few changes to our investment policy that what you would call maybe are a little stricter than with the California state policy. And so we had one change that was unique to our investment policy, and that was a change in the number of days that the report would come from, in this case, PFM to the district, the general manager's office, to my office. And we have expressly said 30 days. The state allows 45. We're going to make ours match theirs. It's not going to change when the report actually gets to us. It is actually sooner than 30 days. And that's the way it will be, because PFM is very customer centric, and they want to meet our requests and the DSO's requests so that you get the report on time. So it won't change anything. We're just changing the numbers in the policy to make it match. And with that, if there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks, Joe. We'll look to my colleagues. President Tyrion.
I'll just thank you for the assurance with regard to the 30 days that we'll keep in that cycle. Because
absolutely will not affect at all the way that we get our report from here, and the way that goes to my office and DSO's office.
Anyone else? We'll look to the public. Is there anyone from the public?
I have no speakers here in the room. Justine, do you have a speaker for item number 7?
We have no speakers for item 7. Thank you.
Great. And with that, this is an action item, so I'll look for a motion to approve in a second.
So move. Second.
Great. And with that, a roll call.
All right. Voting on item number 7 with the first and second, starting with Director Conroy, who just left. Dorsey is not here. Engardio is not here. Garbarino.
Aye.
Giudice.
Yes.
Grosboll.
Yes.
Hernandez. Maston.
Aye.
Milton Peters is absent. Parr. Aye. Rabbit.
Aye.
Rodoni.
Aye.
Sefai is absent. Snyder.
Aye.
Stephanie is absent. Theory is absent. Second Vice President Hill.
Yes.
First Vice President Cochran.
Yes.
And President Terrio.
yes.
You have 12 ayes.
Great. Thank you very much. Moving on then to item 8, status report on the fiscal year 22-23 budget. Joe.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is your monthly look at the current budget that they're in right now. Through 8 months, there is no significant changes to this report from last time. Your budget will be balanced with the use of one-time federal funding, as we have said, and that is incorporated into the tables and graphs and charts that are connected to this board item. There was one anomaly that I was going to point out, and that's in page 44. Just that we had a late arriving revenue in bus, and so the revenue appeared from an accounting standpoint in February, although it was actually earned in January. We're going to fix that going forward with an adjustment and a footnote. It's about $200,000. So right now, if you look at on page 30, page 144, there's and the table there has the second bottom part of the table has January and February. And you'll see January's revenue looked like it dropped dramatically. And well, that's not actually the case. The revenue shouldn't be 300,000. It was approximately 510,000. So it would make January and February's revenue relatively equal. This gets slid over, and next time you look at this, we will have slid it over. So, and with a little footnote saying we did that. And that's it. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them on this report.
Great. Looking to my colleagues, any questions for Joe?
Just a thank you to the general manager for explaining that to me on the phone on Monday.
Great. anyone from the public on this item? It's informational, no action.
We have no speakers in the room, but I believe, Justine, do you have a speaker on the line for item number 8?
We do. David Popel is here. David?
Great. David Pilpel again, I think the last time today. So I'm sure I sound like a broken record, but I think the key question for the strategic financial plan is whether the district should go bigger, go smaller, or just wait and see and sort of hold in place. That's a pretty critical decision that I hope will be discussed over the next few months. My calculated fiscal cliff date is now about March 16th, 2024. So it's less than a year away. I may be off by a bit, but I don't think by that much. So time is still very much of the essence. And as I said last month and before, if bridge tolls need to increase July 1 of 2024 or sooner, then several months of lead time would be needed. So again, I'm just very concerned about the fiscal issues here, as I know you all are. Thanks again for listening.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
We have no other speakers on this item. Thank you.
Great, and thank you, Joe. We'll move on then to item number 9, monthly review of Golden Gate Bridge, traffic tolls, bus, ferry, transit, patronage fares for the 8 months ending February 23. Joe?
Thank you very much. We could have your attention to the committee and the board to page 149, and that's the table. We haven't looked at it for a couple of months, but it's a normal table. Page 149, and it shows ridership or patronage on the bridge. On the left-hand side, bridge, bus, and ferry, and then on the right-hand side is the corresponding revenues. And I think that all we were doing here is you now have 8 months. If you look at the column that's if you go to the the left-hand side, which is the actual traffic on the bridge in the top left-hand corner, that box. The middle column is the one is for actual this year. That's what's happening this year. You know, we were averaging about 1.4 million vehicles in the summer months, and the summer months are always higher. So then it starts to drop, and then now into the winter, it's down to about 1.2 million vehicles. And so what we're all waiting for is whether or not it's going to go back up into the summer again, you know, and that's our expectation that it will to some degree do that. And what we'll see is whether or not it's going to go higher than last year. And that's sort of, we've been watching the last couple of years. We are into a normal pattern. But as we've all discussed, the normal pattern is lower than the old normal pattern. It's following the seasonality, but it's following at a slightly lower point than it used to. And that's what you see in the graphs that follow and the pages that follow. The same thing is occurring in bus. If we just stay with that column and go down to the next box on the left-hand side, we were averaging 100 to 100, up to 120,000, 110 to 120,000 riders a month. Now we're in the just under 100,000. It's relatively steady. Bus seasonality is less than it used to be because we're not carrying the choice, what we used to call choice riders, but commuter riders into the city. They're, as we all know, they're remaining working from home. So they were more seasonal in nature than our regular regional riders, we would call them. People who were more transit dependent, of course, were on the bus all the time. So we're seeing a little less seasonality there. Just 120 down to 100,000. And then ferry is always where we've seen the most seasonality, more than bridge and more than bus. And that's the same column on the very bottom. We were averaging up to 120,000 in the summertime. And that includes, as the general manager mentioned, both business to Angel Island and also to the Giants game, which always bumps the numbers a little bit, even when they're not playing so well. Somebody over here was commenting on that. And now, of course, we're about almost half that, a little more than half. And that is, the winter was always smaller. It's fallen a larger fall than we may have normally seen in the past, but that's again because we don't have as many base riders as we've had in the past, going back and forth on the ferry system. And if you turn to
Joe, folks looked at the actual 21-22, the left column, the two over the actual 22-23, the bus and ferry. While we have a long ways to go, you can see how much we've changed from the prior year for each month. And so we have a long ways to go, but we are clearly trending in a good direction. And so I think that's, you know, to Director Groswell's point, are we trying to grow service? Are we growing service? Month to month, you see that it has gone up bus and ferry pretty significantly for the current fiscal year as compared to the prior fiscal year. So sorry, Joe.
No, I appreciate that. That is why we keep those columns there. Absolutely. Just so that we all can look and see that something is positive. And we fortunately don't have the 20 and 19 column there, because then that's when you see the large drop. And that's why if you turn down then to page 151 and 152, these are familiar to you, so I won't go over them again, but you can see that's why we have these graphs, because these graphs are the ones that include the years prior to the pandemic. And if you look at, we'll just look at one, and you can look at the rest. They're similar. The top one, the first one you get to on page 151, is the bridge traffic, and you can see the very large drop there in red, and that's the pandemic year itself. The blue one at the very top, or the line at the very top, is what the year prior to the pandemic. So that would be 2019. So prior to the pandemic, you can see it stayed up high. And then we just only have 2 months of our new, this is calendar year. So 2 months of our new calendar year. And so you see it's just overlaying just slightly above the yellow, which was last year. So we're on the bridge slightly higher than we were last year. And that's a good sign. And there's a very good chance, considering that the yellow and the green, which are the last 2 years, followed each other quite closely. There's a good chance this year is going to follow that one probably quite closely. Bridge traffic tends to be, besides the pandemic year, bridge traffic has been consistent. It's followed a similar pattern for decades. It's just people were in the habit, and this is what we do. So I would expect we will see that again. We've all got our fingers crossed that it will grow a little bit, so we'll be slightly above the yellow, and maybe we'll follow that trend in the years to come. But we'll see. It'd be a very interesting year, given that we have, as a community, lifted the restrictions just last month, and so officially, so things potentially could change gradually, most likely. Anyway, then you can see the same impact if you will, just because we have two graphs down. On the bottom graph on page 151, that's bus, and you can see the same thing. Buses, as Dennis pointed out, the first 2 months of bus, that's the kind of purplish maroon line. It depends on what color it comes up on your sheet, but it's the short little line on the left-hand side of that graph. You can see it's above last year, and that's the point. It's higher than last year. It's higher than the year before. So those are good signs. And with that, do I turn it back to you, or do I just keep going?
I think. Why don't you keep going, and we'll take public comment as we roll in these items.
Yes, because I'll go to the finances, and that's on page 157. And these are your monthly operating finances, both expenses and revenues, page 157. And that's item 10A. With this one, as always, behind this report are your detailed financial line items, both for the 3 divisions and the district division, and then also your balance sheet below back from that. But we'll just take a look at the front page where we summarize the revenue and expenses. And if you look at that table that's on the front page, page 157, in the middle, the first bold line, the top bold line, which it says subtotal district operating revenue, that's your earned revenue for the district over the last 2 years, and then also the budget in the middle. So on the far right-hand side is this current year. So we're at about 132 million, 1318. So 132 million. Last year at this time, we were just over 113 million, 113 and a half. So considerably more revenue. That's driven primarily by tolls. Also, some fare increase of that. And last year we had a rescission in, not a rescission, sort of a trade in local grant revenue, STA revenue, was traded out as part of our swap in order to get more federal one-time funding. There was a $5 million change. So that also changes a little bit this particular line item. So it's a positive. It's above the budget. The budget was at 123, and we're at 132. So that's an excellent change. The next bold line down, just right below it, is the consolidated district's expenses. Right now we're at 145 million through 8 months, and last year at this time we're 136. The biggest difference there is salaries and benefits, the cost for salaries and benefits, and also fuel. We are running more service both in the bus division and in the ferry division than we did last year, and the fuel prices, as you guys are all aware, are higher than they were last year too. So the combination has put fuel up, and that's takes care of most of that expense increase over time. Lastly, the bottom bold line, which is the third one down, that shows on the far right-hand side approximately a negative $13,147,000 number. That's at 3 months. That's our shortfall, and that's the amount that we will need to be making up as we move forward in time. We'll see what that number ends up for the year. It's better than last year at this time, as 122. So that's positive. The big difference here, of course, we have more revenue and we have more expense. We have even more revenue than we expected last year. But that'll be our target as we go forward in the planning stages, is that 13 million, whatever that ends up being at the end of the year. Positive point to make there is that when we put your budget together, that number was 75 million for the whole year, and it's 13 million through 8 months. So we know it's not going to get to 75 million. In other words, we are going to spend less and earn more than we expected in the budget, and all of that will come forward in discussions, more discussions as we move into the new budget, which will come to you in May, and then in June when we approve that new budget, and then we'll work through this summer into the projections and talk about how this incorporates into our future need for funding and changes the district may or may not have to make. And then lastly, if we could turn to page 167, that's the capital. So we looked at operating just now, and we will then look briefly at capital. Capital expenses are running about 73% of budget through 8 months. That's slightly higher than you would expect. 68% would be normal at this point of year. Capital budget's never normal. It spends out as projects come in. In this particular year, the district does its dredging in the summertime prior to the rains, and that was a large expense this year. And the fact that we've paid that out kind of buoyed district expenditures earlier in the year than may have been planned, not on the part of the engineering, on part of finance, if you just kind of straight line numbers. So that's why you can't quite do that. So everything's going to normal. That's why it looks at 70%, slightly higher. And the big difference is that Larkspur dredging project. If you have any questions on that or any of these other reports, actually, I'm happy to take them now.
Director Maston.
Yeah.
Joe, you explained well why the on district operating expenses on 157, why we're 9 million over last year. I can make some assumptions, but I'd rather hear it from you as to why we're 25,000 or 25 million under this year's projected.
For expenses?
Yes.
It's simply put that when we put the budget together the last this is this third year we've done this, we've created what I've termed as an aspirational budget. The budget included the expenditures that would allow the district to react to a return of its customers without running around with our heads cut off, so to speak, and trying to put together a budget that would allow us to do that. There was an expectation or a hope that at different times it's changed over those years, whether or not that would actually happen. But it was always deemed the right thing to do is to put it in the budget to allow it to happen if it was, so we could be responsive. As you know, Dennis repeatedly says, we are putting out service. He's already said it in this meeting several times. We put out service as our customers have created demand for it, and they haven't yet. So we haven't put that service out. So in other words, the money was put in the budget to run that service, primarily bus service, but also some ferry service. And the demand has not been there, so that the district has not put that service in. Therefore, we have not spent that money. And that's almost all of the money you see. There are a few little pockets elsewhere, but the vast majority is that.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you. Roswell.
Regarding the ferry revenue and ridership, do we have a sense as to how much of that is attributable to the new service to Angel Island?
We do. I don't have it off the top of my head. But it's something we'd be happy to do. We could break it out.
At some point, I'd be interested. It's not that critical, but I was reading an article on it. We predicted we might lose $1 million a year on that service, and I wondered if that turned out to be correct. So, but at some point, it was in the IJ.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
We can provide that.
Offer one insight. I don't have the dollar amount, but one benefit of the service is that the cost of adding it wasn't that great because we have boats going to Tiburon anyway. So if you think about it, in the morning, a boat leaves Tiburon with computers, it goes into the city, and it drops them off, and they would go back virtually empty to Tiburon to do another trip. Well, now it takes people from San Francisco to Angel Island.
No, and I support it.
Yeah.
I just am.
But we'll get the numbers.
Yeah. And but our ferry numbers and revenue are up in part because of that additional service
Yes.
compared to prior years.
Yes. We've added back a little bit of Larkspur service, and we'll be adding one more trip, I believe, this week. But so we're slowly adding service as we see customers return, so that we can make our one-time federal COVID relief money last as long as possible.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Director Parr.
Right, so now we're struggling putting together a strategic plan to try to figure out what our budgets need to be from here on out. And I should know this, but do we put together an aspirational budget every year?
No, not something that I would advise you to do either. This is a very, very unusual time.
I was hoping you would say it was a one-time anomaly. And that we don't always hope for more than we can
No, this is a very unusual. This is extremely unusual time, as you guys all know. I mean, this pandemic was monumental throughout our society, but if you look at it from a district's perspective, it was we're a fee-based company. We were set up to provide. The public had a demand. The demand was they wanted to get into the city, and in the case of the beginning demand back in the 30s, they didn't want to take the ferry anymore. So they got us all together and put their money forward and build a bridge, and it's worked great. Then the bridge got so crowded, we picked up transit. So but it's been always on the back of the person who is going to use the service. We charge them, and everything was great because we had this very constant demand. I mean, I used to love to go in front of the bankers and tell them these things because most companies can't say that. Our demand, we run the monopoly. It's a monopoly, and which is pretty much unusual right off the bat that you have a monopoly. So you got to feel good about that if you're a finance person. And then on top of that, we have a very steady demand for our service. So it was great. And then the pandemic came, and for us, it is worse than it is for most businesses because we don't really have another source of revenue. It's just on the backs of the people who use our service. Now, fortunately, the bridge has continued to keep most of its users, roughly 85%. So that has been a big help to us. But if the customer no longer demands it, I know, Director Groves, even your idea, and we agree, we need to try different ways of enticing them back. But if the customer isn't demanding the service, and we were set up to provide that service, and they don't want us anymore, it's going to be hard to convince them to use us because, as I said, we're a monopoly. It's not like we have to convince them to go to the city, almost. And that's not going to be easy to do necessarily. Now, on a recreational standpoint, which I think Dennis has talked about, we're doing a pretty good job. But there's only, I don't know if we can run our business on a recreational thing. That's a very difficult thing to do. Very difficult part of our business. So going back to the aspirational budget part, we as an organization will have to, and that's part of your strategic planning, come to the terms of looking at the future as a steady state more, and a future budget. It won't be this year. You will receive another aspirational budget, and you can tell me no when we get there, but we'll bring that to you.
Use those words. So
yeah. It'll be another budget that says we want to have enough money in there in case our ridership comes back. Because as I just said, we just lifted the official emergency, right? So let's give ourselves at least one more year to see if it's going to work.
But that impact when we talk about fiscal cliffs?
It does.
The aspirational piece of it.
Yes, it does.
Makes it artificial when the cliff is.
It makes it seem sooner than it hopefully will be.
Yes.
So, we are being very prudent in only putting service out to meet customer demand. So we're not spending all of our one-time federal COVID relief money running empty buses and boats.
Right. I understand we're not spending it, but if we budget it and if all of our numbers are on that target.
Yes.
I just want to
I will give
understand
you
it
I will give you new numbers like I did last year and the year before. So we staff is already working on those. Track things in the background. Of course, you can imagine that I do, and know sort of where we are, even in the reality that sort of in a actual expenditure format rather than a budget format. But so we will do that about the same time that you're looking at this new budget. We'll talk about what the actual impact has been. I think the question about the 25 million is spot on. So that tells you right there that we're not going to spend that 25 million, or it may be a bigger number by the time we get to the end of the year. That means that 25 million is not going to leave the bank account, which means it's going to be there. And if we're spending an extra couple $1 million a month, that's more than a year right there. That's more than a year, that 25 million. So that in other words, that's more than a year. We'll be able to keep that expenditure rate going longer than our speaker actually predicted right there, right off the bat. But then there's more to it than just that. That's a really simplistic way of looking at it. But it is a very, it's a way that you're right. The budget numbers do kind of cloud and they don't show. They're not intended to do that, but they do to some degree.
When Joe did projections last fall, he gave you a couple scenarios. One was the budget, and then one was,
we call it a low expenditure model. That was sort of monitoring. That was taking our own current expenditures, kind of keeping them going at this rate, thinking that our business wasn't going to dramatically change, which is one possibility, right? That's the way it goes.
Anyone else? Appreciate this, and thank you, Dennis and I were having that discussion about how long are we going to do these aspirational budgets going forward. I do agree. Usually, I think any elected would probably say that you don't want to leave that much money on the table because that usually means that those services aren't being provided that were anticipated. In this case, the service demand is not there, so I'm glad the money is left on the table and it's been able to draw out that quote unquote fiscal cliff much, much longer. So thank you for that. And I also want to say thank you for the additional budget information that we've been receiving through the pandemic, because I think it really paints that picture looking through the different numbers that we have.
Well, the aspirational budget is really a testament to all of you, because I can guarantee if I were speaking to a group of people that have my job, they would all be looking at me like, you are crazy. Because it puts all of you in a difficult place, because people can point to you and say, hey, the money's sitting in your budget. Why don't you spend it? And you have done an excellent job of saying, we don't have the demand for it. We are ready to support the demand when it comes, and we will spend it when it comes. And if we can just keep that going, that will allow us to live a little longer on the federal one-time money and hopefully watch our customers or help our customers come back if they demand that service. In other words, if they need to go back to work in the city. And that'll be the big issue, because that is why we're here. I mean, the bread and butter was people going into the city to work. That was our business model.
Kind of a question for,
Please, go ahead.
being first one person, but I stayed downtown last night, and the hotels were packed because they had a game developers conference in town. Do we see when we have these huge conventions, is there an uptick of folks that are using us for, like, to Dick's point, to go out to Angel Island or whatever?
If the weather's nice, they'll rent a bike and go to Sausalito. So we'll see them at the bridge. You don't get any money from them, but you'll get them $14 if they don't have a Clipper card when they go to the machine to buy a single-use ticket to go back to the city.
Yeah.
And so,
because I was just wondering too, if there's a way to,
in the springtime when the weather's nice, we usually end up adding a second boat to Sausalito in the afternoon, just to meet the demand. And that's something we started a year ago, and we're pleased that we needed to start it, and the budget gave us the ability to do it. So, conferences returning to San Francisco is good for us. International travel is great for us. Because, people.
So you do see a size, at least a little bit of an uptick when those folks are in town.
Before the pandemic, in the summer months, 5% of our traffic at the bridge were rental cars. Wow. So, so it affects us every place a little bit, and a little bit here and a little bit there solves problems.
Director Garber.
One other statistic that sometimes helps explain the situation, although I don't want to keep beating on negative news, but during the real breadth of the pandemic, we were losing 1.5 million a week. It was then down to 1.1. Is that where we are now?
So we were actually over 3 million a week for the darkest days of the pandemic.
Pollyanna, I remembered half of it.
So I'm glad
was right.
Our minds have a way of blocking out bad memories.
Yes, they do.
Cassandra was right.
So, right now we're going through some bad weather weeks, so you really don't look at any week.
Okay.
But, before the atmospheric rivers and the, whatever they call the wind bombs we had today. We were below 1 million down. We're about,
there you go.
it was bouncing around. But it's not 3 million. It's not great. But since our revenues are down about 1 million, I think a good week was down only 800. The good news is, though, that our expenses are down, not quite enough, but they're down also. And that's why you see on Joe's numbers that the amount of federal funds we'll use this year, we anticipate it'll be much less than we originally budgeted, and it'll allow us to live longer.
So one statistic needs to go with the other. We've curbed expenses to be able to.
That is correct.
Appreciate that. My wife did offer that we should, the other night when the Bay Bridge was closed, that we should throw a gantry up real quick on the northbound lanes. Because there was a lot of one-time travelers going north on 101. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for all the work. And with that, I will look to, and we can wrap in public comment and with these last couple of items and with public comment in general.
Will do. We have no speakers in the room. Justine, would you like to see if you have any speakers on items 9, 10, or even public comment under 11?
We have no speakers and no one for public comment this morning. Thank you. I did ask when I polled earlier.
Great. Thank you very much. So we have no speakers.
And with that, we're at the end of our agenda, and can I get a motion to adjourn? We have a motion and a second, and hearing no objections, we are adjourned. Thank you.